Hey guys, what's up? It's Shout Style or Joe the Editor, however you want to call me. Alright, so this video kind of wanted to talk about motherboards. Now in the past I've made videos about like what's a good GPU for editing or how much RAM do you need, for VFX stuff. Recently I just learned something new about motherboards that I feel may help anybody that's starting out learning about computers. So if you're planning on building a computer for yourself, primarily to edit. So just to make it clear, I mainly edit with Premiere Pro. I like Adobe products. I honestly don't see any reason why I should change. And so everything that I do usually evolves around editing with Premiere Pro, right? And also I like to do VFX stuff and also learning to do 3D stuff. So a lot of the stuff that I need in regards to my computer, because a computer is a tool, obviously. So certain components of the computer, I needed to do something specific. So that's why I picked the parts that I do. So the situation I find myself in is that when I'm editing a video for Kyle, I need to render the video out, and also I need to send it over to him so he can upload it to his channel, right? With Paul, usually need to start editing a video around the same time. So the problem that I've been having lately is that if my computer is rendering out a 4K video that's kind of like 10 minutes plus long, then usually that video can take up to 30 to 40 minutes, right? And that's time I'm just sitting around doing jack shit. Also, another thing I like to do is I like to edit using proxy files, right? So one thing I like to do is I take all the raw files that I get from either Paul and Kyle, and I transcode them using Media Encoder into a Cineform codec. Now, the cool thing about Cineform, it was created by GoPro, and it's that it's GPU accelerated. So what that means is that instead of like the CPU doing all the work to pretty much play back the video, it's using the GPU mainly to play back the video. So the benefit of that is, as you can see as I scroll my mouse over like the video files here, it's super fast. Now, if I was to disable the proxies, let's disable the proxies. As you can see, pretty much it starts to lag. If I was to do a time-lapse video, pretty much the playback starts to stutter as well. So when it's using the proxy, the playback is super fast, no problem. It doesn't lag in any matter. So it does save me a lot of time and frustration because I can move the mouse around through the timeline and not worry about having the computer to catch up my editing, when I'm trying to edit as fast as possible. So using Cineform is awesome. Definitely look into that. Now, however, the thing is, when I transcode the files into Cineform, sometimes it can take up to an hour, depending on how big the project is, to transcode all the files, right? I'm sitting around waiting for like the computer to transcode all the files before I'm able to start editing. When it's transcoding, the computer is maxed out with the CPU usage, and I cannot work because I'll just lag or I can crash the computer. I have tried to edit while the computer is transcoding my files, and it just freezes and it crashes, and there's really no point to it, right? So I reached out to both Kyle and Paul to help me out create what I call a render box, and thankfully both of them helped me out. Mainly Kyle, he did help me with a lot of the parts. As I was putting my new computer together, pretty much one of the main things that I find actually pretty cool and useful was the motherboard. Now, I don't really have any favorites when it comes to products or anything like that. I just basically want it to work. I really don't give a shit. But at the moment, from what I know, ASRock is kind of like one of the not necessarily lower end products, but they're pretty much the most economical. And from what I see, pretty much all their computer parts, are pretty good, and also they're very fair priced. The motherboard that I got from Kyle is the ASRock AB350M. It's a mini micro ATX motherboard. And the cool thing about this is that say if you're starting to edit, basically this motherboard that costs about $50 to $60 has everything you need to have a really good editing system. And the cool thing about that is, if you don't know much about computer parts, if you're starting now, basically this motherboard has just about everything you need to get going. The main thing is using a Ryzen CPU now is very beneficial because the price to performance that you get using a Ryzen CPU is just awesome, right? Now, yes, Intel may be faster, but again, the massive difference of $200 to $500, you can get a really good CPU that's very fast and very capable of getting your work done. And you can use the money that you save buying a Ryzen CPU, you can turn it around and put it into other parts of your computer, like graphics cards, for example, or the very fucking expensive RAM, which is not cool at the moment. Now, for my Now, one thing I like about this motherboard is basically you can go up to 32 gigabytes of RAM use. Now, at the moment, my render box has 16 and is doing just fine, right? But me personally, since I like to use After Effects, it uses a lot of RAM to store pretty much temporary files inside the RAM. That's how After Effects works. It allocates any files that it needs temporarily into your RAM. With my main editing system, it's an X99 motherboard. I have it maxed out to 128 gigabytes. And yeah, trust me, it does use all the RAM depending on what I'm doing, especially when I'm using 4K, doing 4K VFX. Yeah, it eats it up pretty badly. But if you're starting out, if you want to start with 16, that's definitely that's pretty good to start with. If you just care about editing with Premiere Pro, you should be fine. But once you start getting into like After Effects, then you definitely may want to upgrade your RAM to something higher. But 16 gigabytes as a minimum requirement to get going, I think is awesome. 32 gigabytes, which is the most you can have with this motherboard, is definitely very well worth to spend the money on RAM. Another thing is this motherboard has one slot for a graphics card. It has two. It has a small one right up here, but it has one long one for the graphics card. Kyle was able to help me out with a 1070 graphics card, but it's not a mini. One thing I noticed is that this area right here, the connectors here for the USB 3 right here, pretty much it interfered with like a full-size graphics card. So that's one thing I didn't like about this motherboard, the position of these guys. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure this was designed to have a mini graphics cards in mind. I'm sure if I got the mini graphics cards, it wouldn't interfere, but it kind of interfered, and pretty much what I had to do was I had to push down the graphics card a little bit just to tuck it underneath these cables. So there is a slight slag that you're able to see. I mean, it's not that noticeable, but like I said, I had to like push down the graphics card just a tad bit, so it's able to like be underneath these connectors right here. It's the only thing I don't like, but again, that's mainly because this card was probably designed for smaller builds, obviously, instead of having a a graphics card that's bigger than the motherboard, right? But the point I'm trying to say is that from my understanding, Premiere Pro, it does not work well with slide configurations, right? So as the moment of making this video, Premiere Pro doesn't really work well with slide configuration, so having multiple GPUs is not necessary. Also, if you're gonna do a multiple GPU configuration, you wouldn't need this motherboard. But like I said, if you're starting out to edit, having a motherboard like this with one like slot for a graphics card is definitely more than enough, and this is awesome. So that's what I got. That's what I have on my main system, just one graphics card. Like again, this motherboard has enough that you need for $60 to get going. Another thing I like about this motherboard, it does have a lot of like USB 3.0 connectors, right? It has two 2.0 connectors, but then right there, I had these connected to my mouse and the keyboard, right? And I got these ones here. It has a LAN, so right now I have a connection between my main editing system, which is the X99 motherboard, and this guy. So I have them connected using the LAN here. So that's something to keep in mind. If you want to connect two computers, but if you want to have, say, like this computer connected to the internet using the Ethernet cable, then you want to get a motherboard that has two Ethernet connectors. Because my X99 has two of these Ethernet ports. So one I have it connected to the internet, and the other one is connected directly into this motherboard. So I'm able to transfer files between the two computers, using a LAN connection. Another thing to keep in mind when getting a motherboard is how many fan connectors you have. This one has obviously the CPU fan, but from the looks of it, it only has two connectors for the case fans, right? So if you want to connect more fans, pretty much you're gonna have to get adapters from like your power supply to connect to another fan, right? That's something I had to do with my main editing system. Actually, I kind of ran out of like fan connectors, so I had to get an adapter from like the power supply to like the fan directly. So something to keep in mind. But like I said, this one, if you're building a small build, this should be fine, definitely. You connect two fans on the front of like the computer case and like the back case, just have that connected directly to like the power supply to have it consistently, exhausting the air out. But anyways, one more thing, pretty much this motherboard, it does have a connector around this area to connect to the USB ports in the front of a case. However, to connect to internally, say through SATA, this one has 4 connectors, right? So that's pretty good. You definitely want to have one SSD card for your OS. and like have that primarily for all your software along with your operating system. For starters, you probably won't need that much storage. I'll definitely suggest having mainly mechanical drives because they're cheaper and can have like a bigger amount of storage. And also from my experience, when you're working with proxies, actually the playback using mechanical hard drives are pretty fast, so you don't have to worry about like any type of lag using a mechanical hard drive, instead of like spending a lot of money on SSDs because those things can get pretty pricey. So for $60, you can get like a 1 terabyte hard drive or more. There's a benefit of using mechanical hard drives to start out with, right? So the guys have 4 SATA connectors, up to 6 gigabytes and transfer speeds and stuff like that. So yeah, that was pretty good. So again, I mean, I'm not trying to like show or explain that I know a lot about motherboards because I clearly don't. Pretty much what I'm trying to say is that this motherboard being $60 and being a small form factor is definitely more than enough to get you started to edit if that's what you're looking for, And for $60, I think this thing is awesome, right? So if I was starting out, if I was speaking to my younger self before I knew as much as I do about editing and computers, I would definitely recommend myself to get one of these guys and then build your computer around this guy. And also, if you want to get a graphics card, if you're starting out, pretty much getting a 1050 Ti or a 1060, that should be that's a good starting point for getting a graphics card when you're not 100% certain on what to get when you're starting to edit. But yeah, again, once you render out your files to a 1080 format using Cineform, pretty much the playback is awesome and you're able to edit 4K files basically using the proxies. And once you render out the footage, pretty much you just link it up to like the raw files and you're rendering out a 4K file format. You got to do some work to help yourself edit faster, especially when you don't have like the latest and greatest. But the point of me making this video is that you don't need the best to edit a 4K video. With this guy, you get 16 to 32 gigabytes of RAM. Get yourself maybe a 1050 Ti or 1060, something in a small form factor. Get one of those mini cards, and I think you should be good to go. And you got like 4 SATA connectors to connect for storage devices, which I would suggest. Don't have all your files, save your raw files in one storage device, and don't render it into the same storage device where it's reading the files from. Basically, you want to have one storage device where it's reading the files, and you want to have another storage device where it's writing the final render into, right? So basically, it's reading into one, and then it's writing into one. And also, you have one SSD, where pretty much all the software is installed in that SSD, and leave it alone. Do not install anything else in that SSD. Do not store your pictures or music in it. Just leave it alone, right? Keep it as clean as possible. So anyways, that's enough for this video. I got nothing else to add. I'm pretty much trying to give you an idea that, if you want to start editing, or if you want to improve your workflow, or if you want to like upgrade your computer, but you don't know where to start. And if you don't have that much money, or if you want to save your money for something else, definitely investing in one of these types of motherboards is awesome, right? So that's all I got for you. Really appreciate you guys watching this. I'll definitely try to make more videos. When I'm ready to make one, I'll make one. All right. So anyways, that's all I got for you. Thanks again. Bye.